Hey, you'll never guess what I just found. I am standing right now in a portal to a world full of little people. Yeah, really. I don't think you believe me. I'll prove it. Just one sec. It worked! Now some of you might be confused, but if you know me, you know that this has been an elaborate and brilliant short joke. You're welcome. Hey guys, welcome to another Backlogged replay I'm really excited about today. This marks the second game in my journey to complete my entire Legend of Zelda series, which is pretty much the whole thing. I think I have them all, aside from the CDI games that we'll ignore. I plan to go through these games in chronological story order based on the Hyrule Historia's timeline, which, as we all know, is completely accurate with no errors whatsoever. Most of these games are going to be replays since The Legend of Zelda is my all-time favorite series. You can look forward to a video highlighting what those franchises are. I'm working on it. It's going to be so hard for me to just do a First Strike review when Tears of the Kingdom comes out soon, but it will be done. The point of this show is to work through my backlog in a way that kind of teaches you how to do so. So I really need to focus. Today we're looking at The Legend of Zelda, the Minish Cap for Game Boy Advance. It's the third portable Zelda title made in partnership with Capcom, and it's a great part of the Game Boy Advance library. You can totally play this game now if you have the expansion pass for Nintendo Switch Online, as they just added it to the Game Boy Advance library there. But I started this forever ago on several platforms, namely the Wii U Virtual Console, which is what was recorded for today's episode. Let's get going! I know I missed this game when it was first released on the Game Boy Advance. I couldn't tell you exactly when I first played it either. It was either the Wii U or 3DS Ambassador Program release. I'm nearly positive. And now I own it on all of those systems and the actual Game Boy Advance, but I'm not even sure which one I beat first. Overall, this is far from my favorite Zelda, but there's not a single one I don't like, at least a bit. This one is somewhere on the lower end for me, only because of the small dungeon count. It is very nearly my favorite portable Zelda title, Switch games notwithstanding. The art style here is a great choice for the Game Boy Advance. The pixel art looks reminiscent of A Link to the Past, but with inspiration from Wind Waker's tomb styling, particularly in any still images. Definitely among the best looking Game Boy Advance games. The overall sound design is also pretty good. No GBA game sounds amazing, but Minish Cap does a good job of creating variety in the soundtrack with limited capabilities, and the sound effects are all on point. Just goes to show, good things can come in small packages. I know that was far too easy, yet I apologize for nothing. That's just one little pun after all. The gameplay is also very solid. Nobody will be surprised by anything here if you know your Zelda, but it's still a delight. Like many games in the series, the overall design is linked to one major gimmick, and this time around, that gimmick allows Link to shrink at various points to solve puzzles, explore dungeons, and chat up the Minish people. Basically borrowers. They like to help the Hylians without making themselves known, so they do things like make shoes while the cobbler is asleep. Not creepy at all. Nope, no creep factor here. I actually really like the concept of changing size to make the familiar feel like a new experience. There's some really clever ideas here, like a rainy path that suddenly becomes a death trap thanks to the raindrops being the size of whole swimming pools now. Otherwise, it's your usual open-world, exploring, dungeon-crawling, side-questing adventure that Zelda has been for years and years, with familiar controls to other portable Zelda games. They did add the action button to the R button controls, but otherwise you got 2 buttons for 2 items, sword, shield, and all others. All in all, I find this to be yet another satisfying Zelda experience. The story here doesn't fit easily into the timeline, but I suspect it's here due to the complete lack of any variety of Ganondorf. Instead, we have here Vati, an evil sorcerer who is tearing Hyrule apart in search of something called a light force. I have a theory regarding what this is, but that would spoil the story, so I'll refrain. I suppose the Hyrule Historia or Zelda Encyclopedia probably answers that question too. Oh, Vati also turns Princess Zelda, your childhood friend, to stone, so, you know, go get him, beat him up. Also, they acknowledge that you're a child by reasoning that interaction with the Minish people is impossible for adults. Nothing like classic fantasy child endangerment. Oh, I almost forgot, you also have a talking hat friend. He's fine. Off we go! It's shocking how different it feels playing classic Zelda after Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild felt so new and different, but every time I revisit the older titles, I'm reminded that the core of Zelda has never changed, only the mechanics and approach. What I mean is that exploring the world is the true core of any good Zelda, with or without dungeons. In this case, the exploration is handled through the use of kinstones. Basically, you pick up these stones all over the place and press L next to someone with a little thought bubble, and when you match their piece, a reward shows up somewhere on the map. These can range from basic treasure chests and special loot monsters, to whole features like a shop to buy even more kinstone pieces. While this does a lot to help the world feel way bigger than it actually is, it does eventually start to feel tedious when you have more footage of wandering for kinstone treasure than actually playing through the game. Overall, the game is decently paced, with new people to match kinstones with after each dungeon, leading to retreads across the world to find new stuff all over the place. The game basically cycles between 3 overall sections, at least the way that I tend to play it. First, exploring in kinstones. Then, there's a hefty approach just to get to the dungeon, like climbing Mount Krenel or traversing the Castor Wilds, and then you have the dungeons. There are about 6 or so of these dungeons. It's the lowest amount, second only to Majora's Mask, which is a bizarre game in a lot of ways anyway. Each of these sections balloons to become pretty large towards the end of the game, which gets pretty exhausting if I'm being honest. They try to move the story in interesting directions to explain why it gets longer, but it still just feels too long. Hardly a terrible thing, really. It's pretty tough to come up with much more to cover about the gameplay, mostly because I love and play so much Zelda that I just want to say, yeah, this is Zelda. I'm literally sitting at the computer with massive writer's block trying to direct where I want to go with this. I think what's satisfying about Zelda games, and this is very much the same for the Metroidvania genre, is that your progression comes from earning new items and abilities, not simply numbers. Don't misunderstand, I love me a good RPG. But with Zelda, I continually get glimpses of things that I know I can't deal with yet, and I know that I'm gonna get some kind of item or something else to figure that out later. And it makes the wandering and backtracking feel worthwhile, not obnoxious or boring, because Zelda almost always provides a matching reward to the effort it takes to get there. That's not always true. I have lost out on massive piles of rupees at the end in this game because I couldn't find a way to spend them. Pretty lame, honestly. But the point is, there's never a spot that looks like there might be something to find that ends up leading to a dead end with no reward, and that satisfaction just makes me want to find it all. The world in this case is just a bit claustrophobic by the end, but the endless running for kinstones keeps me going just about all the way. I will probably say this many times as we play through this series, that there is no Zelda game that I don't enjoy. This one is very much in the lower area of my favorite Zelda games, but that doesn't make it bad in any way. The shrinking mechanics are clever fun, and the overall world design blends a lot of concepts from other Zelda games, especially Link to the Past and Wind Waker. There's even a couple new items here that would be brought back in later games. At the end of the day, the shrinking just isn't enough to make this game feel all that unique. Everything else about this game feels like something we've seen before, even though it's all put together very well. Even the story here is good, but kinda samey. Vati hasn't come back very often, but it's easy to forget that he was the first non-Ganon villain in Zelda. He's just not very interesting. I won't spoil it just in case, but his motivation for being evil is very half-baked. His design is alright, and in a game that has mostly lame bosses, Vati's boss battle is excellent. One of the best, I'd say, actually. Most bosses are pretty easy to figure out, but I forget how to beat Vati every single time I play this game. Very cool. Speaking of bosses, though, most of them are easy, but kinda boring with two exceptions. Technologically speaking, there's a late-game Manta Ray boss that's very impressive and feels epic, even if it's not all that special otherwise. On the other hand, the Big Octorok is the worst boss ever! I hate it so much. I always have to be fully stocked with health items because its attacks are almost impossible to avoid. If it's not dropping random rocks or shooting unblockable flames, it's sucking you in across half the room. I guess you're supposed to use the Pegasus boots all the time here, but I just hate it. Every Octorok I see, from now on till the end of time, must die. Vengeance will be mine! I also feel like most Zelda games are about as good as their dungeons, and the dungeon design here is really clever. Only one really feels backtracky and tedious, but there are so many concepts that are just a lot of fun. This is obvious right from the start, as the first dungeon is entirely in shrunken form and centers around a barrel that you have to unhinge and then spin around inside it to find several exit points. There are too many ideas like that to list here, but I did notice this time how the last dungeon, the Palace of Winds, has you collect the 3 staple items in reverse. Every dungeon you get a map, a compass, and a big key, but you get them in the opposite order in the Palace of Winds. That's so cool! Overall, I'm still pretty satisfied with this game. It's not as special as most Zelda games, but it has some cool ideas that sometimes pay off, sometimes not so much. It's still overall a good time, and it's one of the best titles on the GPA, top 20 worst case. The story has a nice, classic feel. The world is colorful and fun, feels bigger than it actually is, which is an impressive feat for the system, and clearly inspired elements of future Zelda titles. Even though the bosses aren't very impressive aside from Vati himself, the dungeons are cool and fun. There aren't a ton of versions of this game out there in the wild, so the Switch Online version is by far the easiest to get a hold of. So considering that, if you have this game in your backlog, you should definitely finish it. It's a good time, it's a very safe version of a Zelda game, and it's worth experiencing once. The next Backlogged in this series, the Zelda series specifically, does have to be a shorty, because I can't record footage for 4 Swords. But that means the next proper backlog for this series is my favorite video game of all time, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Brace yourselves for a long one, I am not holding anything back for that one. I can't wait to see you there. Thanks again for tuning in to today's Backlogged review. I had a real good time with this one. I've beaten the game a million times now, but before I get to rambly, let's move on to the trivia question for the next Backlogged episode. A little bit more homework than trivia this time around. I want you to finish this phrase, I am, and then look up related releases from 2020. There's your homework, and that's going to be the next review. See you soon!